November 24th, 1971. A man steps onto Northwest Orient Flight 305. He's dressed in a sharp suit, polite, almost forgettable. He orders a bourbon, lights a cigarette, and passes a note to a flight attendant. By the time the plane lands, he will have pulled off the most daring heist in aviation history, only to vanish into the thin, freezing air of the Pacific Northwest. He left behind a legacy that has stumped the FBI for over 5 decades. They called him Dan Cooper. But who was he, and how did he simply cease to exist? If you are watching this right now, I want to ask you something. What really happened? Because every case you are about to hear has one thing in common. The investigation was closed. The file was sealed. And the truth was never found. These are the cases that detectives couldn't solve, that witnesses couldn't explain, and that official records couldn't account for. If you are someone who needs to know what really happened, you are in the right place. Subscribe to Unsolved Vault and join thousands of investigators uncovering the case's history left unfinished. Welcome back. This is Unsolved Vault. And today, we open a case that was never meant to stay closed. On the evening of November 24th, 1971, travelers moved through Portland International Airport with the familiar pace that often came before Thanksgiving. Businessmen carried briefcases. Families checked schedules and gathered coats before boarding. Among them stood a man dressed in a dark suit with a white shirt and narrow black tie. He appeared to be in his 40s and carried only a small black case. Nothing about him drew attention. He purchased a one-way ticket for Northwest Orient Flight 305 and signed the name Dan Cooper. Inside the terminal, ordinary sounds blended into a quiet rhythm. Rolling luggage crossed polished floors while distant announcements drifted through the building. Cigarette smoke lingered in certain corners, mixing with the smell of coffee and damp winter jackets. Outside, evening clouds covered the sky above Oregon, and cold air followed passengers through opening doors. Conversations about family visits and holiday plans filled waiting areas with soft voices. The atmosphere carried the calm feeling of a normal journey, the kind people quickly forgot once they reached home. As departure time approached, movement gathered around the gate. Flight attendants prepared for another short trip north to Seattle. Passengers lined up and handed over their boarding passes. The man who called himself Dan Cooper joined them without hesitation. Witnesses later remembered no strange behavior and no dramatic gestures. He chose seat 18C near the rear of the aircraft and placed his case beside him. Outside the windows, service crews finished their work while engines prepared for the evening flight. One small decision had quietly placed him inside a story nobody recognized yet. Perhaps the most curious detail rested in the silence surrounding that moment. Thousands of journeys had begun in exactly the same way, and there was no reason to suspect this one would leave a mark on American history. The man himself seemed almost ordinary by design, as though he understood the comfort that ordinary appearances created. Looking back decades later, investigators and witnesses would return to these first minutes again and again. They searched for hidden meaning inside memories that once seemed too simple to remember. Northwest Orient Flight 305 was scheduled as a short journey between Portland and Seattle. The aircraft waiting on the runway was a Boeing 727, a familiar sight across the United States during the early 70s. Most passengers expected nothing more than a quiet trip lasting less than an hour. Some settled into newspapers. Others spoke with companions or watched the evening darkness gather beyond the windows. The holiday season had already begun to shape people's thoughts. Home, family, and simple routines occupied their attention far more than the details of another flight. The cabin itself reflected the style of commercial travel from another era. Seats carried warm colors. Ashtrays rested inside armrests. Smoking during flights remained common, and nobody found it unusual. Flight attendants moved through the aisle with practiced ease, greeting passengers and preparing for departure. Their work followed routines repeated countless times. Safety checks, friendly smiles, and simple conversations filled the first minutes after boarding. Nothing suggested that this particular evening would be remembered long after other flights from that year faded from memory. The man sitting in seat 18C blended naturally into the environment around him. Reports later described him as calm and polite. He wore dark sunglasses despite the fading daylight and spoke in a measured voice. After settling into his seat, he ordered a bourbon and soda, then lit a cigarette. Such details barely registered with those nearby because they matched the customs of the time. Business travelers often dressed in suits. Drinks and cigarettes were ordinary parts of flying. Even his quiet manner appeared entirely natural within the relaxed atmosphere of the cabin. Passengers around him carried their own stories without knowing they had become part of someone else's mystery. A woman reading a magazine occasionally glanced toward the aisle. A man across the cabin reviewed papers before a meeting in Seattle. Others stared through small windows where city lights slowly disappeared beneath the clouds. Flight attendants exchanged brief smiles and prepared beverage carts. Somewhere beneath those ordinary moments, history waited with unusual patience. The future mystery surrounding D.B. Cooper had not yet begun to reveal itself. At that point, he was simply another traveler sharing the evening sky with strangers who expected nothing extraordinary. After takeoff, the engine settled into a steady sound that wrapped around the cabin like distant thunder. The aircraft climbed above the dark landscape below, while small lights from towns and roads faded into scattered patterns. Inside, people relaxed into familiar habits. Some leaned back and closed their eyes. Others continued conversations in low voices. The man in seat 18C remained composed and quiet. No sudden movements disturbed the calm. Yet hidden beneath that ordinary scene, an invisible line had already been crossed. Before long, one simple exchange would change everything aboard Flight 305. Among the crew working that evening was flight attendant Florence Schaffner. She had performed the same duties many times before and understood the quiet rhythm that settled over passengers after takeoff. While moving through the cabin, she noticed the man in seat 18C trying to get her attention. At first, she assumed he was another traveler offering a phone number or a casual remark. Such things happened often enough that they rarely seemed important. Without much thought, she accepted the folded piece of paper and placed it inside her pocket. A few moments later, the man leaned slightly toward her and spoke in a calm voice. He told her she should read the note because he had a bomb. Nothing about his expression suggested panic or excitement. According to later accounts, his words came quietly and without emotion. Florence removed the paper and unfolded it. The message carried no dramatic language. Instead, it delivered a direct statement that changed the meaning of everything around her. Suddenly, ordinary routines and pleasant conversations belonged to another world that had existed only minutes earlier. She moved beside him, trying to remain composed. The man opened his black case just enough for her to glimpse several red cylinders connected by wires. Whether the device was real or not would remain uncertain, but in that moment uncertainty itself carried enormous weight. He spoke politely and with surprising patience. There was no shouting and no display meant to frighten the cabin. His voice remained steady. Passengers nearby continued reading magazines and enjoying drinks, unaware that a strange conversation was unfolding only a few feet away. Florence listened carefully as he explained what he wanted. He requested $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes waiting in Seattle. He instructed her to relay the demands to the cockpit. The strange contrast between his behavior and his message left a lasting impression. Witnesses later described him as courteous, even thoughtful in his manner. Nothing matched the image many people associated with a hijacker. He seemed less like a desperate criminal and more like a businessman discussing arrangements. That contrast would become one of the most unsettling details remembered from the entire case. As the message reached the cockpit, Captain William Scott received information unlike anything expected on a routine flight. The crew remained remarkably calm and informed air traffic controllers about the situation. Far below, officials began receiving news that seemed almost impossible to believe. Yet inside the aircraft, the atmosphere remained deceptively normal. Drinks were served. Conversations continued. Passengers watched clouds outside their windows without understanding that history had quietly changed direction. Somewhere in seat 18C, the man calling himself Dan Cooper waited with unusual patience, as though he had already imagined every step ahead. News of the hijacking spread through control centers with remarkable speed, though very few people beyond those circles knew anything unusual was happening. Communication moved between pilots, airline officials, and federal authorities as the aircraft continued toward Seattle. Each person receiving the information faced the same strange reality. A passenger sitting quietly inside a commercial airliner claimed to possess a bomb and demanded money. Decisions had to be made carefully. Nobody wanted panic inside the cabin, and nobody wanted to gamble with the lives of those on board. Captain William Scott chose to follow instructions while maintaining an atmosphere of normality. He informed passengers that a minor mechanical issue required a delay before landing. Most accepted the explanation without concern. The aircraft circled above the region while arrangements took shape below. During those extra minutes, Seat 18C remained occupied by a man who appeared entirely comfortable. He drank his bourbon slowly and occasionally spoke with members of the crew. His behavior revealed no impatience. Time itself seemed to work in his favor, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who expected cooperation. Flight attendant Tina Mucklow soon joined the conversations with the mysterious passenger. Like Florence Schaffner, she later described him as polite and surprisingly composed. He never raised his voice. He thanked crew members and spoke in complete sentences that sounded almost conversational. At one point, he requested meals for the crew because he understood they had been working for hours. Such gestures left lasting impressions on those who encountered him. The contrast felt difficult to explain. Beneath the demands and threats stood a man whose manners appeared strangely ordinary, creating memories that remained vivid decades later. Outside the aircraft, evening darkness deepened over Seattle. Emergency vehicles gathered quietly around the airport while officials prepared bags containing $200,000 in cash. 4 parachutes were also collected according to the demands. Every detail required careful attention because nobody truly understood the intentions of the man aboard Flight 305. Reporters remained unaware. Families waiting for arriving passengers knew nothing. Across the city, people continued their Thanksgiving plans without realizing that one of America's most enduring mysteries was approaching their doorstep. After nearly 2 hours in the air, the lights of Seattle finally appeared beneath the clouds. From the windows, the city looked peaceful and distant. Inside the cabin, passengers prepared for arrival with the usual habits of travelers nearing the end of a journey. They gathered belongings and expected familiar routines to resume. None of them suspected that they had already become witnesses to something history would never fully explain. Hidden behind quiet conversations and calm expressions, The next chapter of the mystery waited on the runway below, where money and parachutes were already being assembled. As Flight 305 approached Seattle, the atmosphere inside the cockpit carried a different weight from the calm scene in the passenger cabin. Messages passed between the crew and authorities below with careful precision. Every instruction mattered. Every delay had purpose. On the ground, airline officials and law enforcement officers worked under pressure while trying to avoid mistakes. Bags containing $20 bills were prepared and recorded. The serial numbers were documented with great care. For parachutes arrived as requested. Nobody knew why 4 had been demanded, but few were willing to test the reasoning of the man waiting above them. When the aircraft finally landed, emergency vehicles remained at a distance. Their lights reflected against the damp pavement while the airport itself appeared unusually quiet. Through the windows, passengers saw little reason for concern. Some stretched after the long delay. Others checked watches and wondered about missed plans. Beyond their view, teams hurried across the runway carrying money and equipment. The operation unfolded with remarkable caution. Everyone involved understood that the lives inside the aircraft depended on patience. There would be no dramatic rush and no sudden confrontation beneath the cold November sky. Inside the cabin, the man known as Dan Cooper observed events with calm attention. Witnesses later recalled that he seemed informed and confident. He wore the same dark suit and narrow tie that had attracted no notice earlier that evening. His sunglasses remained in place. He smoked cigarettes and continued drinking bourbon while speaking politely with Tina Mucklow. Nothing about his manner suggested fear. Even after hours had passed, he appeared relaxed. That composure puzzled investigators for years. It was as though he had rehearsed the evening in his mind long before purchasing the ticket in Portland. Eventually, the exchange began. Airline personnel delivered the money and parachutes aboard the aircraft. One by one, passengers were allowed to leave. Many stepped onto the runway with confusion rather than terror. They knew delays had occurred, but few understood the extraordinary events unfolding around them. Reporters and cameras had not yet transformed the night into national news. Those travelers returned to ordinary lives carrying memories that would grow stranger with every passing year. Behind them, a smaller group remained on board with a man whose true identity still belonged to the shadows. As midnight approached, the mystery stood on the edge of another transformation. The first stage had unfolded with almost unbelievable restraint. A stranger had boarded a plane, revealed his demands, and received exactly what he requested. Yet the most famous chapter had not even begun. Beyond the lights of Seattle waited dark skies, heavy clouds, and a decision that would turn an unusual crime into a legend. Somewhere between certainty and disappearance, the man called Dan Cooper prepared for the next step, while nobody around him could imagine how completely he would vanish from history. He wasn't just a hijacker. He was a master of the mundane. He didn't scream, he didn't threaten. He simply took control with the quiet confidence of a man who had done this before. But as the investigation began, the ordinary man started to look like a phantom. Witness descriptions painted a surprisingly clear picture of the man who called himself Dan Cooper. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, with dark hair and calm features that drew little attention. His suit looked neat and professional, matching the appearance of countless business travelers moving through airports in the early 1970s. A white shirt and narrow black tie completed the image. Even the sunglasses he wore blended naturally with the style of the time. Nothing about his physical appearance suggested mystery. That ordinary quality would later become one of the most puzzling details. People who encountered him remembered small impressions rather than dramatic moments. His voice carried a low and steady tone. He spoke clearly and rarely used more words than necessary. The smell of cigarette smoke often surrounded him, mixed with the faint scent of bourbon after takeoff. Flight attendants later recalled his polite manner and measured way of speaking. There was no nervous energy in his conversations. Those brief exchanges created a strange feeling afterward. Everyone remembered meeting him, yet nobody could explain why he seemed both familiar and difficult to define. As the evening progressed, tiny habits revealed themselves through simple actions. He folded his note carefully before handing it over. He ordered his drink without hesitation and thanked crew members when they brought it. During conversations, he leaned forward slightly and spoke with quiet confidence. Witnesses noticed that he seemed attentive rather than distracted. His eyes moved with purpose, taking in details around him. These behaviors unfolded naturally and never attracted concern. Looking back later, investigators found themselves studying ordinary gestures that once appeared too unimportant to remember. Perhaps that is what gave the mystery its unusual shape. People remembered enough to recognize him, but never enough to truly understand him. The details felt complete until someone tried to connect them into a larger picture. A face, a voice, and a few quiet habits remained suspended in memory like pieces of an unfinished portrait. Decades later, those fragments continued to invite questions. Somehow, a man who stood in plain sight among strangers managed to leave behind certainty and uncertainty at the very same time. Long before investigators assigned files and evidence numbers to the case, memories became the first clues. Those memories came from ordinary people who had shared space with a man known as Dan Cooper. Their descriptions agreed on many points, yet each account carried subtle differences. Some thought he looked slightly older. Others believed he appeared younger. A few remembered sharper features, while others recalled softer ones. None of these differences seemed unusual at first. Human memory often captured impressions rather than exact details, and nobody had imagined they were observing someone who would disappear into history. Flight attendants spent more time near him than anyone else aboard the aircraft. Florence Schaffner and Tina Mucklow later offered descriptions that carried remarkable consistency. They remembered a man with calm eyes and controlled movements. His manner remained polite throughout their interactions. Even when discussing demands, he avoided threats delivered with anger. Witnesses found that contrast difficult to forget. He behaved like someone engaged in business rather than violence. Years later, those conversations still stood out because they challenged expectations. The mystery surrounding his identity grew partly from the strange balance between his actions and his personality. Investigators soon discovered that appearance alone offered few answers. Composite sketches were created from witness descriptions, producing the face now recognized around the world. Yet sketches captured only moments filtered through memory. Hair color changed with age. Lighting affected perception. Different artists emphasized different features. People who believed they knew the mysterious man often focused on details that matched their own assumptions. Some imagined a military background. Others pictured an experienced criminal. The face became famous, but fame itself created problems. The more widely the image spread, the more uncertain the search became. Another curious detail emerged through his clothing. The dark suit and narrow tie reflected common fashion during the early 70s. Thousands of businessmen dressed exactly the same way. Nothing about the outfit carried obvious clues about wealth, profession, or background. Even his sunglasses fit naturally within the style of the period. Investigators hoped unusual details might separate him from countless others, but ordinary choices offered little guidance. The man seemed wrapped inside familiarity. His appearance blended with the world around him so completely that it almost felt intentional, though nobody could prove such a thing. As months turned into years, witnesses continued revisiting those first impressions. Some questioned whether memory had altered certain details. Others remained confident in what they remembered. Yet the portrait survived with surprising strength. A polite voice, a neat suit, and a face marked by calm confidence became lasting pieces of the mystery. The image felt close enough to recognize, yet distant enough to escape understanding. That strange balance transformed an unknown passenger into something far more elusive. People searched for hidden meanings within familiar details, and the mystery deepened with every passing decade. One of the most revealing aspects of the man known as Dan Cooper was not his appearance, but the rhythm of his behavior. Witnesses remembered how naturally he moved through ordinary situations. He never appeared rushed. He never wasted energy on unnecessary gestures. His requests came in complete sentences, spoken with patience and unusual confidence. Even before the hijacking became known, he seemed comfortable inside his surroundings. Looking back, investigators noticed how carefully his actions fit into the flow of everyday life. Nothing felt improvised. Each movement carried the quiet precision of someone who preferred preparation over chance. His habits aboard Flight 305 added more layers to that impression. He ordered a bourbon and soda, smoked cigarettes, and watched events unfold with steady attention. These choices reflected common routines during the early 1970s, making him appear even less remarkable. Yet small details attracted interest later. Witnesses noticed that he rarely fidgeted. He did not speak excessively or seek attention from people nearby. He seemed aware of time and surroundings without appearing distracted. Such habits suggested discipline, though discipline itself could belong to many kinds of people. Answers remained hidden inside observations that offered possibilities rather than certainty. Conversations with flight attendants revealed another unusual quality. He listened carefully when others spoke. According to those who interacted with him, he answered questions directly and often used simple language. There was no dramatic personality and no obvious desire to intimidate people through force. Instead, he relied on calm words and quiet confidence. Some investigators later wondered whether this reflected military training or experience in stressful situations. Others disagreed and saw only a man with exceptional self-control. The evidence supported neither conclusion completely. Like many parts of the mystery, interpretation depended on perspective rather than proof. The longer people studied his behavior, the harder it became to separate fact from assumption. Human beings naturally search for meaning inside patterns. A calm voice might suggest experience. Politeness might imply confidence. A careful habit might appear deliberate even when it is ordinary. Investigators faced that challenge repeatedly. Every small action seemed important because so little else remained. What kind of man behaved this way during a hijacking? The question lingered without resolution. His personality emerged through fragments rather than certainty, leaving behind impressions that felt strangely vivid and frustratingly incomplete. Years later, experts continued examining those fragments with quiet fascination. Criminal profilers, historians, and amateur investigators all searched for clues hidden inside ordinary behavior. Yet the mystery resisted easy explanations. The man remembered by witnesses appeared intelligent, composed, and remarkably ordinary at the same time. Those qualities created a portrait that refused to fit familiar categories. He was neither reckless nor theatrical. He left behind habits, conversations, and impressions, but not understanding. Perhaps that was the most unsettling part. The closer people believed they had come to knowing him, the further away his true identity seemed to drift. As news of the hijacking spread across the country, people began comparing the image of D.B. Cooper with men they had known. Friends remembered former co-workers. Families thought about distant relatives. Neighbors recalled quiet acquaintances who had disappeared years earlier. The mystery encouraged thousands of personal suspicions. Investigators received letters and phone calls from people convinced they had recognized the face from newspapers and television reports. Some tips arrived with confidence. Others carried uncertainty. Together they created a strange landscape where ordinary memories became possible clues, and familiar faces suddenly seemed connected to something far larger. The flood of information quickly became overwhelming. Agents sorted through names that ranged from professional criminals to respected citizens with no history of violence. Veterans, engineers, pilots, and businessmen all appeared in different theories. Some suspects resembled the famous sketches. Others attracted attention because of their skills or unusual histories. Yet appearances often created false confidence. A photograph might suggest similarities, but closer examination frequently exposed differences. Every promising lead seemed to produce another question. The search for one man slowly expanded into a maze filled with countless possibilities and very few certainties. Among the strangest challenges investigators faced was the passage of time itself. Faces changed. Hair turned gray. People moved across states or disappeared from old neighborhoods. Memories softened and shifted. Witnesses aged, and details that once seemed clear became harder to separate from newspaper stories and television programs. The mystery evolved alongside the people trying to solve it. A man remembered in 1971 no longer looked the same years later. Investigators often found themselves chasing versions of a person who existed only inside fading recollections and carefully preserved photographs. Meanwhile, the public created its own image of D.B. Cooper. He became something larger than an unknown passenger. Stories portrayed him as a criminal, an adventurer, a mastermind, or even a folk hero. Popular culture added layers that blended fact with imagination. Each new book or documentary introduced another interpretation. Over time, these versions shaped how people thought about him. The real individual behind the mystery seemed increasingly hidden beneath stories created by others. The legend grew louder while the actual man became harder to see. Perhaps that transformation explains why the mystery continues to inspire curiosity. People are not searching only for a name. They are searching for the person hidden behind decades of assumptions and myths. Witnesses remembered a calm voice and polite manners. Investigators collected evidence and theories. The public created stories that reflected their own ideas. Somewhere beneath those layers stood the original man who boarded Flight 305. Yet with every passing year, that figure appeared less like a stranger from history and more like a shadow shaped by memory, speculation, and the quiet power of unanswered questions. As investigators continued their search, they discovered that understanding a person through memories alone carried serious limitations. Witnesses could describe his voice, his posture, and the way he interacted with others, but none of those details explained who he truly was. They offered impressions rather than answers. A calm manner could belong to many people. A business suit revealed little about a profession. Even confidence itself pointed in different directions. Every characteristic seemed meaningful until compared against thousands of ordinary men living in America during the early 1970s. Psychologists and criminal profilers later studied the behavior described by witnesses with quiet fascination. Some believed the hijacker possessed military experience because of his composure and knowledge of aircraft. Others argued that such conclusions rested too heavily on assumptions. Confidence under pressure could come from many kinds of backgrounds. The same qualities that appeared unusual during the crime might have seemed entirely ordinary under different circumstances. Experts often reached different conclusions while examining the same evidence. That uncertainty became part of the mystery itself. Even specialists struggled to agree on the personality hidden behind the famous sketches. There was also the question of intention. Why had he chosen to appear so ordinary? Was it deliberate, or was his appearance simply the result of habits shared by countless businessmen of the era? His dark suit, tie, and polite manner created an image that blended effortlessly into public spaces. Nothing about him demanded attention. In a strange way, his greatest disguise may have been familiarity itself. People naturally search for unusual traits when danger appears. Yet the man remembered by witnesses carried very few unusual qualities. He vanished behind the comforting image of normality. Decades after the hijacking, interviews with crew members revealed something unexpected. Despite everything that happened, they often described him with curiosity rather than hatred. His behavior had left complicated memories. He frightened them, yet he rarely acted with cruelty. He threatened lives, yet he maintained manners that seemed almost impossible to reconcile with his actions. Those contradictions stayed with them long after the event ended. The mystery was not only about finding a missing man. It was about understanding how ordinary appearances could hide intentions nobody around him recognized. Perhaps that is why the image of D.B. Cooper continues to feel strangely alive. His face became famous, but fame never brought clarity. Witnesses remembered enough to sketch him. Investigators gathered enough details to study him. Yet the person behind those fragments remained hidden. A voice, a suit, a glass of bourbon, and a few quiet conversations survived the passing decades. They formed a portrait that appeared complete from a distance. But the closer people looked, the more they discovered empty spaces where certainty should have been. That quiet absence became part of the legend itself. Witnesses were certain of his calm, a man who ordered meals for the crew while holding a bomb in his briefcase. But beneath that polite veneer, a clock was ticking. The note had been passed. The demand for the money and the parachutes was made. And the flight, which had begun in total normalcy, was about to descend into the ultimate mystery. Inside the cabin of Flight 305, familiar routines shaped the evening. Passengers relaxed beneath soft overhead lights while flight attendants moved through the aisle with practiced ease. Seat 18C rested near the rear of the aircraft, where the man known as Dan Cooper sat quietly with a drink beside him. Newspapers lay open across tray tables, and cigarette smoke drifted through the cabin in thin layers. Nothing appeared unusual. The arrangement of people, seats, and small conversations reflected the ordinary rhythm of commercial air travel in 1971. The sounds inside the aircraft carried the comforting pattern of a routine flight. Engines produced a steady hum beneath the voices of passengers exchanging quiet remarks. Ice shifted inside glasses as drinks were served. The scent of tobacco mixed with coffee and warm meals moving through the aisle. Outside the windows, darkness covered the landscape below, leaving only scattered lights far beneath the clouds. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner experienced another ordinary evening at work, surrounded by sounds and sensations that had become deeply familiar through countless flights. Then a small interaction altered the direction of the night. The man in seat 18C called for Florence and handed her a folded note. At first, she assumed it contained something harmless, perhaps a telephone number from another passenger. Without reading it, she placed the paper inside her pocket and continued working. Moments later, He leaned closer and quietly suggested that she should look at it. His voice carried no anger and no urgency. That brief exchange changed something invisible inside the cabin, though nobody else around them sensed it. Years later, witnesses would return to those quiet seconds with curiosity. A simple piece of paper had divided the evening into two different worlds. Before the note, the flight belonged to ordinary memories. Afterward, every detail seemed touched by hidden meaning. What made the moment unsettling was its simplicity. There was no dramatic warning and no sudden panic. History had turned through a few spoken words, and a folded note passed between strangers. Even now, that silence surrounding the exchange feels almost impossible to fully understand. When Florence Schaffner first slipped the folded note into her pocket, she paid little attention to it. Flight attendants often received friendly messages from passengers, and nothing about the exchange seemed unusual. The man who handed it to her appeared composed, sitting comfortably in his seat with a drink nearby. His expression revealed nothing remarkable. For a few seconds, the note remained forgotten while the ordinary rhythm of cabin service continued around her. The aircraft moved steadily through the evening sky, and nobody nearby suspected that something important had already begun. Then the passenger spoke again. Leaning slightly toward Florence, he quietly told her that she should read the note because he had a bomb. His words came without raised voices or sudden movements. The calm delivery itself made the statement feel strange. There was no panic in his face. No desperate energy surrounded him. According to later accounts, his tone sounded almost conversational. Florence removed the note and unfolded it. Inside, she found a message carrying demands and a warning that immediately changed the meaning of the evening. She sat beside him as instructed, trying to control her emotions while continuing to appear calm. The man opened his black briefcase just enough to reveal several red cylinders connected by wires. Whether the device represented a real bomb or something meant to create fear would remain uncertain. In that moment, uncertainty itself carried enormous power. Florence later remembered how composed he seemed while discussing his demands. He wanted money and parachutes waiting in Seattle. He spoke clearly and avoided unnecessary words. Nothing about his behavior resembled the dramatic scenes people often imagined when thinking about hijackings. Passengers sitting only a few rows away continued with their own concerns. Some looked through magazines. Others watched darkness beyond the windows or enjoyed drinks brought by the crew. Nearby conversations rose and faded beneath the sound of the engines. Nobody noticed the quiet discussion taking place beside seat 18C. The contrast felt almost surreal. Two different realities occupied the same cabin. One belonged to ordinary travelers expecting a short flight. The other belonged to a flight attendant absorbing words that carried unimaginable consequences. Both realities existed side by side, separated by knowledge rather than distance. Perhaps that strange separation explains why the moment still feels unsettling decades later. Nothing visible announced the beginning of the mystery. No screams echoed through the cabin. No struggle interrupted the journey. A man spoke softly, and another world quietly emerged behind ordinary appearances. Hidden beneath calm voices and routine gestures, one of the most famous crimes in American history had begun. Yet for everyone except two people, the evening still appeared perfectly normal, and that quiet contrast would remain one of the most remarkable details remembered from Flight 305. After reading the note, Florence Schaffner faced a task that demanded extraordinary composure. She needed to move through the cabin without revealing the fear building inside her thoughts. The passengers around her continued living inside ordinary moments, unaware that danger had entered the aircraft. She returned to her duties with controlled movements and carefully measured expressions. Every smile and every simple conversation suddenly carried a different meaning. Hidden beneath the appearance of normal service, she carried knowledge that nobody else on board possessed. The quiet burden rested entirely within her actions. When she sat beside the man again, he spoke with remarkable calm. According to later accounts, he avoided threats delivered through anger. Instead, he explained what he wanted in a direct and almost businesslike manner. He requested $200,000 and 4 parachutes waiting in Seattle. As he spoke, he briefly opened his case and allowed her another glimpse inside. The image of red cylinders connected by wires remained fixed in her memory. Whether real or not, the sight left no room for doubt in her mind. She understood the seriousness of the situation immediately. Florence carefully carried the message to the cockpit, where Captain William Scott and the crew absorbed information unlike anything expected during a routine flight. Their response reflected years of experience and discipline. Panic offered no solutions. Calm communication became their greatest tool. Messages passed between the aircraft and ground authorities with increasing urgency, though passengers remained unaware of those exchanges. High above the darkness below, Flight 305 entered a strange space between ordinary travel and unfolding crisis. The crew understood that every decision carried consequences they could not fully predict. Meanwhile, the man in seat 18C continued behaving with quiet confidence. He ordered another drink and smoked cigarettes while waiting. Witnesses later described his patience as one of the most unsettling aspects of the evening. He showed no signs of excitement or anxiety. Time appeared to mean something different to him. Rather than forcing events through aggression, he seemed willing to let them unfold naturally. That attitude created an atmosphere unlike many crimes marked by chaos and desperation. The mystery surrounding his personality grew stronger with every calm conversation and every measured request. Far beyond the cabin, officials on the ground began receiving reports that sounded almost unreal. A commercial airliner had been hijacked by a man who remained seated and spoke politely. Such details challenged expectations. Yet inside the aircraft, passengers continued reading magazines and discussing holiday plans. The contrast between those peaceful moments and the hidden conversations taking place behind them gave the night a strange quality. One quiet exchange had changed everything, and still, most people aboard Flight 305 had no reason to suspect that history was unfolding around them. Inside the cockpit, the crew faced an unusual challenge. They needed to protect everyone aboard while maintaining the appearance of an ordinary flight. Captain William Scott and his fellow crew members understood that fear spreading through the cabin could create problems nobody wanted. Messages traveled between the aircraft and air traffic controllers below. Every response had to be clear and deliberate. There was little room for mistakes. While passengers relaxed in their seats, hidden conversations shaped the future of the flight. The people making those decisions understood that calm thinking mattered more than speed. Florence Schaffner remained close to the man in seat 18C during much of the evening. He continued speaking in a steady voice and showed no signs of losing control. According to later recollections, he treated her politely and answered questions without hesitation. The contrast between his behavior and his demands remained difficult to understand. He did not appear interested in frightening people unnecessarily. Instead, he focused on details and expected cooperation. That approach created a strange atmosphere inside the aircraft. Fear existed, yet it moved quietly beneath ordinary conversations and familiar routines. As time passed, another flight attendant named Tina Mucklow became more involved. Young and composed, she joined the effort to communicate with a mysterious passenger. Cooper seemed comfortable speaking with her, and witnesses later recalled that their conversations sounded surprisingly normal. He explained instructions clearly and occasionally made observations about the flight itself. At one point, he even discussed practical details with little emotion in his voice. Those exchanges left lasting impressions because they felt so ordinary. Behind every sentence stood the reality of a hijacking, yet the words themselves carried none of the drama people might expect. Elsewhere inside the cabin, life followed its usual patterns. Travelers adjusted coats, checked watches, and wondered about the delay. Some passengers looked through windows into the darkness, while others continued conversations interrupted only by the sound of engines. A few likely felt mild frustration without understanding the true reason for the extended flight. Nobody suspected that crew members moved carefully between two worlds. One world belonged to ordinary travelers. The other belonged to quiet negotiations unfolding just beyond their awareness. Both realities shared the same cabin and the same night sky. That hidden separation gave the evening an almost unreal quality. A simple note had created invisible boundaries that only a handful of people could see. Words spoken in calm voices carried enormous consequences, while the rest of the passengers lived inside peaceful assumptions. Looking back decades later, investigators often reflected on that contrast. History had entered the aircraft without announcing itself. No one heard the exact moment when an ordinary journey became something far stranger. Yet somewhere between conversations and quiet glances, the course of the night had changed forever. As communication continued between the cockpit and authorities below, the man in seat 18C appeared content to wait. He understood that preparations would take time and showed little impatience. According to crew members, he sat quietly, smoking cigarettes and occasionally sipping bourbon while discussing details with Tina Mucklow. The strange calm surrounding him never fully disappeared. Even under extraordinary circumstances, he behaved with the relaxed manner of someone expecting events to unfold exactly as planned. That confidence left a lasting impression. It suggested preparation, though no one could determine how much preparation truly existed. Meanwhile, officials on the ground faced decisions shaped by uncertainty. They knew only what the crew reported through radio messages. A man claiming to possess a bomb wanted money and parachutes. Lives depended on careful choices rather than force. Teams assembled ransom money while others searched for parachutes that matched the unusual request. The information reaching them painted a curious picture. This was not a hijacker shouting demands or creating chaos. Instead, they heard descriptions of a polite passenger speaking with remarkable control. Such details seemed almost difficult to reconcile with the seriousness of the situation. Inside the aircraft, passengers remained separated from the truth by nothing more than a lack of knowledge. Some noticed the delay and wondered about schedules. Others accepted explanations involving mechanical problems and returned to magazines or conversations. The cabin lights cast a familiar glow across rows of seats. Glasses clinked softly against tray tables. Beyond the windows, darkness covered the Pacific Northwest. Ordinary sights and sounds continued surrounding people who had unknowingly become part of history. Their memories would later acquire new meaning when they discovered what had quietly unfolded around them. Years afterward, those moments continued to fascinate investigators and historians. The beginning of the hijacking contained almost none of the violence or confusion often associated with such crimes. Instead, everything started with a folded note, a calm voice, and conversations carried out in low tones. That unusual beginning shaped the identity of the mystery itself. It felt less like an explosion and more like a curtain slowly opening. Piece by piece, The hidden reality revealed itself while ordinary life continued only a few feet away. Perhaps that quiet beginning explains why the story continues to invite curiosity. The transformation from routine flight to historic mystery happened so gently that nobody recognized it at first. There was no dramatic announcement and no visible signal marking the change. A note passed from one hand to another, and history quietly shifted direction. In the years that followed, investigators would search for answers inside evidence and theories. Yet the memory of those first moments endured with unusual power. Everything began in silence, and somehow that silence became part of the legend itself. The note changed everything. The cabin remained calm, the passengers stayed oblivious, but the man in seat 18C was no longer a traveler. He was the puppet master of a high-stakes game. The ransom was being gathered, the parachutes were being readied, and the sky above Seattle was waiting. We've reached the edge of the abyss, and the truth behind his vanishing act is far stranger than anyone imagined. Join me for the next step of this journey, releasing in just 48 hours.